Join me as I explore the exciting world of model railways with behind-the-scenes features, step-by-step tutorials, interviews, videos, reviews and much, much more. I'm Dawn Quest and I love building model railways. Hi everyone, in today's episode I'm going to show you how to make realistic looking foliage for your model railway layout using some very simple materials. It's very quick, it's very simple, and let's get started. The materials you'll need for this step are a baking tray lined with some greaseproof paper, a plastic container, a sieve, gloves, some scissors and a stirrer, plus a blender, and of course your sponges and some water. So those are the materials you're going to need for this project. And when it comes to materials, of course, the most important part are the sponges. And what I've learned through trial and error is that when it comes to choosing your sponges, it really is a question of balancing your time versus your money. And what I mean by that is that this one here is a bathroom sponge. This one here is a cheap as chips kitchen sponge. And if you look closely, you'll see that the bathroom sponge is a lot more porous, a lot more holes in it, whereas the kitchen sponge is a little bit more dense. And I'll tell you why that matters in just a minute. But the big but is that the bathroom sponge, this cost me about £2. This is actually a bigger sponge that I cut into quarters, cost me about £2. Whereas this one, pack of 6 for 75p from a major supermarket brand. I won't tell you which one, but of course, every little helps. And for our American viewers, save money, live better.
We've got German people watching this.
Oh yes, little Launzish.
Oh, there are 2 Indonesian subscribers. Other hand.
So it's not just a question of the cost. If you take a look at this bathroom sponge produced this amount of material, this kitchen sponge produced this amount. They're both roughly the same size, but the kitchen sponge beat the bathroom sponge in producing this amount, this quantity. This took around 5 minutes to make this, and this took around 2 minutes. So obviously, if you're in a hurry, go with this option. But for the sake of 3 minutes, this is much cheaper and you get much, much more. Right, we're going to get started, so allow me to clear the decks, and in the meantime, here's a picture of a train. Right, we're ready to get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is take my sponge and I'm going to pull off this scourer part. Now, don't throw this bit away because this part makes a really, really useful hedge. And I'm going to show you how to do that a little bit later in another video. But this bit, perfect hedge, I'm just going to put that to one side for now. And what you're left with is this sponge. Now, I'm going to start using scissors. And what you can see here is that I'm going to make very, very small cuts. I'm going to cut them into small bits, just like that, very easily. Don't worry about the shape. It doesn't matter. It can be completely random. Now, when I first did this, I made the huge mistake of cutting these into quite big chunks. And what that meant was that when I came to put it in the food processor, the blender, it took forever to chop them down. And even after 20 minutes, it hadn't really made much difference. So my advice to you is just to make them as small as possible. The other thing you can do is you can pull this off with your hands. If you're going to do that, if you're going to pull this off into little pieces, what I suggest you do is that you soak the sponge first in water, because that way these will come off a lot easier than what they're doing right now. So that's just a tip for you. But I'm going to carry on snipping these just for the moment and snip a few more. In the meantime, here's a batch that I made earlier. So you can see I've got all my material here, nice and small, nice small pieces. And so I'm going to now put this in the blender, the food processor. So let me just clear this section away here. And what I would suggest is you get a food processor, a little blender like this one, especially for your projects. Don't use the one that you have in the kitchen. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my material, all the little cut up pieces of sponge, and I'm going to put it into the blender. Just grab handfuls and try and get it in nice and evenly. And then I'm going to add some water, and I'm going to add up to about that level there. Now, some people suggest using alcohol, and the reason for using alcohol would be because alcohol dries quicker and the sponges would dry quicker. And I don't just like to take things at face value, I like to try them out for myself. So I did do a little experiment earlier today and I tested 2 pieces of sponge. one piece with water and one piece with alcohol. And within about an hour, the water soaked sponge was still wet and the alcohol soaked sponge had dried. So it really does make a difference. However, a bottle like this is going to set you back about £7. And with alcohol, of course, every time you use it, more of it evaporates. So it's going to get a little bit expensive. So I'm just going to continue with my water for now. Get your stick, and what you want to do is make sure you push it all the way down to get it nice and soaked. I'm going to add some more water just to make sure this is all nicely covered to about there. And you want to push all that sponge down into your blender, get it all nice and wet, make sure it's all soaked. And this might take a bit of time, so do take some time over this part. Make sure all your pieces are nice and wet. And when you're ready, you're going to give it a little spin in the blender. I'm just going to attach this like this. This is going to get a little bit noisy, and it's also going to take a little bit of time. So what I suggest you do is just check every 10 to 30 seconds or so and use the stick to push down, make sure the sponge is still nice and soaking, nice down in the bottom of the blender. And again, give it another blast from your blender. It's really trial and error. This could take a few minutes, but in the meantime, here's another picture of a train. So after a few minutes, take the lid off, and what you're looking for is to make sure all your pieces are nice and small like this. And you should see this made a real difference, as you can see. So that's all the chopping and cutting over with. Hopefully you've got some nice small pieces in there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to dump this all through a sieve, drain out the water so we can give it a chance to dry. And for this bit, I'm going to need to use some gloves because otherwise your hands are going to get very, very wet. Right. It's best to have a nice container. This is an old Heroes container from last Christmas and a sieve. You're just going to get your mixture, take out the chopping blade, be very careful with that, and then just dump this all through the strainer like that. Make sure you've got all the pieces out, and then you're going to give it a nice squeeze down through the sieve to get out all the mixture. So don't be afraid to really give it a good squeeze. Make sure you've got all that water, all of it out, because the more water you get out of it, the better, the easier and quicker it is to dry. So you might end up with a bit of a mush like that. Don't worry about it. It will dry into separate clumps. And once you're happy that all the water's out, I'm just going to grab these last few bits here. Put that to one side. Now we're going to take our baking tray and I'm just going to line it with some greaseproof paper. This is best to use because it won't stick, so you can just lay out your sponge pieces and then give it a good mix, separate all the clumps, spread it out as finely as possible to give it as much opportunity to dry as you can. So if you're making this in batches, or if you don't have time to paint this right now, it's a good idea to put this aside to dry. So you can set this in an airing cupboard if you have space, or you can even put it in an oven on a very low temperature. If you're in a warmer climate, you can put this outside in the garden to let it dry naturally. But if you're ready to go on to the painting, we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to clear this away and get myself ready for the painting stage. For this step, you're going to need a plastic container, your pre-cut sponges, a selection of paints, and for this project I'm using a mixture of yellows and greens and a touch of black, plus some water, washing up liquid, some gloves and an old paintbrush to mix. So now I'm going to show you how to paint the sponge to give it a really nice, natural, realistic look. And I'm going to use a selection of different shades from dark to light to make it look like there's some shadow, there's some light, and make it look nice and realistic. And I'm going to use a selection of greens and yellows. But of course, if you're doing an autumnal layout, you might want to use yellows and reds and browns. I'm going to be using some acrylic paint that I've got left lying around the house. I'm just going to use that up. but you can also use poster paint, the kind that children use at school, or even emulsion test pots. Those are really, really helpful and useful as well. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the darker shades and then I'm going to proceed to the lighter shades. Okay, let's go. So I've got my gloves on, and you might want to cover your surface with some newspaper just to protect any surfaces. I'm using a Quality Street container. Obviously, I ate a lot of chocolates last Christmas, but this is a good size for this, or you can also use a smaller size for smaller portions of colour. I'm going to start with the greens, and I'll probably start with some darker greens. And these are some old tubes, so just a little bit left in here. Squeeze a bit out. And what I would say to do is to start small. Start with little bits of colour. Don't go all in with a massive amount, and just build it up from there. And then you can just gradually add colour as you go along. Also, I would say don't open these tubes with your teeth unless you want green teeth, as I found out earlier. So just mix it. I'm putting 3 colours in there, and I'm just going to give them a little mix and see if I'm happy with that colour. And really, don't be scared about experimenting. I know some people get a little bit worried about mixing up colour and they're not sure if it's going to turn out right. I would say just test, trial and error, and see what you like. Now I'm going to add a little bit of black to this, just a tiny bit, just to make it just a little bit darker, like that. And I'm just going to keep on mixing until I get the colour I like. Now I'm quite happy with that colour. Okay, now obviously this isn't going to be enough to coat the whole amount of sponge, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to add a little bit of washing up liquid and just a little bit of water, just to mix it to begin with, to make sure I've got my colour right. Okay, and we add the washing up liquid to help smooth the paint and to make it glide easily onto the sponge. As you can see, it's really increasing in volume there. Okay, give it a good mix. Now I'm going to start adding my sponge. I'm quite happy with that colour. In fact, what I might do is might add just a little smidge of black, because I just want it a little bit darker to create the foliage that's in the shadows. Okay, give it a good mix. Okay, just going to put that brush to one side. Now I'm going to take my sponge, and again, start small. You don't want to go in with too much too soon. Just start small, and using the brush, I'm going to just give it a good stir and get all the bits of sponge nice and coated. And of course, with sponge, because it's porous, what you want to do is make sure the paint has really been worked in to the sponge, into all the holes. So give it a good stir, press down into the paint until it's all nice and coated. Scrape off the brush every now and then because it starts to accumulate on the brush head there. And just keep stirring until you're happy, until you're satisfied that all of the sponge is covered and coated in the paint. Now, as you can see, it's still a bit gloopy. There's still a lot of paint, which tells me that I need to add more sponge, which I'm going to do right now. See what I mean by just going a little bit at a time, adding a little bit at a time. You can always correct yourself as you go along. And already you can start to see it looking a lot more like clumps of leaves and bushes. It's already starting to look quite realistic. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm really happy with that colour. So now I'm really happy with how that looks. I'm going to transfer it into a container and allow it to dry, and then I'm going to mix up my next colour. So I'm just going to put the brush down, I'm going to get my container and just gently transfer this into there. And as you can see, it's already looking nice and crumbly. Into there. Okay. Give it a little scatter so you allow it to dry properly, and that's looking really, really good. I'm really, really happy with that. So now I'm going to do my next shade of green, a lighter shade of green. And the common mistake people make is they think that going lighter means you just add white. Well, the thing about adding white is it just makes it a kind of a pastel color, which isn't very naturalistic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same pot, the same container, because I want to use the same tones of green. But this time I'm just going to add a lighter green and some yellow, and yellow will add that lightness that you want. So I'm going to go with, this one's olive green, and I'm just going to give it a good squeeze in there, and maybe some lemon yellow. Lemon yellow is a nice sharp yellow. Give it a good squeeze. And also some yellow ochre, that's kind of a mustardy colour, which is a nice colour to use. Just put it in there like that. And I'm just going to see what this looks like. I'm going to use the same brush, and I don't actually worry too much about combining colours on the brush. I like to mix colours on the brush, and I'm going to give it a good stir and see what colour comes up here. And so this is a nice zingy green there, and that's going to be perfect for the highlights. So what I'm going to do, once again, just a tiny amount of washing up liquid, not too much, because otherwise you'll end up with lots of bubbles. And I'm going to add just a splash of water, not too much, to be honest with you, because you don't want to end up with a gloopy mess. Once again, mix it all in, get in the circles, and you'll see that I'm actually pulling in some of the green from the previous colour, and that's actually all right. And it's all right if the mix isn't uniformly mixed as well, because in nature nothing is uniform. You don't end up with leaves that are uniformly green. So again, don't be worried about mixing in colours. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to add the sponge just a little bit, just for this purpose of this video. I'm not going to add the whole amount in, I'm just going to show you just a little bit, a little sample. Again, I'm going to do the same thing, just going to mix in the sponge and get it nice and coated, push in the colour, get the colour saturated into the sponge itself. And this takes a few minutes, so be patient. What you want to do is make sure you've covered all the basic colour of the original sponge, so you don't see that colour poking through. And there you go. I think we're about done with that. Again, happy with that colour. This is going to look really nice against the darker green. I'm just going to give it one more stir, really push in that colour if you have to. This bit is very therapeutic. Right, done with that. So once again, collect all your bits up, and we're going to put them onto the baking tray once again. Okay. Now this has got quite a bit of paint in, so in another, if I was doing this for my own project, I'd probably add a bit more sponge to soak that paint up. But right now I'm just going to put it onto the baking tray. And again, scatter it, spread it out so it has a chance to dry. There we go. And again, you can already see the clumps starting to form and what it's going to look like when it's finished. Perfect. So that's my second colour. Now I'm going to go for a third colour, an even lighter colour. And some people I know go for 4, 5, 6 colours. It's completely up to you. But for me personally, I go for 3. And I think that creates the most natural effect. And in terms of colours, choosing your colours, what I would really suggest is look at photographs of trees and bushes. Look at them and see if you can identify the different shades. And that will help you decide which colours you're going to use. So for the third colour, once again, I go back to my old container here. I've still got the paint left over in there. That's not going to be a problem at all. I'm now going to add probably a bit more yellow to create that really nice highlight. So once again, same routine, just add a little splodge of each colour. Now, I also sometimes add a layer, I create a layer of white, and white is good for springtime. If you're doing blossom on hedgerows, that's quite good. Or you might want to do a pink. That might be another colour choice that you use to do blossom. Once again, stirring, again, just a dash of washing up liquid and a little bit of water. Give it a good stir to get it nice and liquid. You don't want it too thick and you don't want it too thin. There's just the right consistency there. And then we're going to add the last of the sponge. Once again, get a handful, throw it in. I would say you need less of the lighter colour than the darker colour, because the lighter colour you'll use as a kind of a faint layer, a faint scattering over the darker colour. So I'm just going to spend some time working this into the sponge and getting it nice and coated. So of course for Blossom you can really go to town, choose the shades that you like. In fact, I recently made a large batch of foliage in shades of grey, all the way through from black through to light grey. And the reason I did that was for my current layout, which is the Brief Encounter monochrome model railway layout. And that is all in different shades of grey. And you can see more about that and how I made that on my YouTube channel. Check out the other video on Brief Encounter or on my website. So that's about ready, I think. And again, I'm going to transfer this to the container for my last colour, and then I'm going to set it to dry. And as you can see, that's a nice light shade. I'm going to pull it apart just a little bit to make it easier to dry. And that's about done. Now, some people recommend putting this in the oven to dry to speed up the drying process. I've tried it and actually it does smell a little bit toxic, especially if you're using acrylic paints. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stick this somewhere warm and just give it time to dry properly, probably overnight, so that it's ready for the next step, which will be separating all the clumps into finer particles, and then it'll be ready to use. So I've left the painted sponge to dry overnight in the airing cupboard, and now there's just one more final step. Now it's nice and dry, I'm going to pull it apart into a mixture of smaller and larger clumps to create that really nice realistic look. So that's what I'm going to do just now. Be very gentle, you don't have to be too rough. You don't want to crumble this into dust. So pulling it apart very gently, I'm going to do that with all the three colours. And then when you're happy with how it looks, you can either apply these colours directly as single colours to your layout, or you can combine them to make a mixture of light and dark. And I'm just going to show you what they look like. So I'm just going to put some on this paper here. And there you have your three colours. So that's how I make painted foliage for my railway layouts. I hope you enjoyed this video. All that's left for me to say is goodbye, see you later, auf Wiedersehen, and for my 2 Indonesian subscribers, Selamat tinggal. If you like this video, please do like, share, and of course subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of all my future videos. I'm Dawn Quest, and this is Model Railway Quest.